Salmond, we're used to hearing you argue that Scotland is better off as an independent country and not tied to an undemocratic super-state. That being the case, why are you so keen on the European Union?
Because Scotland can be independent within the European structure. I mean, the key difference between the European Union and, for example, the Westminster arrangement is if Scotland were independent within Europe, we'd control 99% of our taxation base, everything except the VAT contribution. In Westminster, even with the new powers coming to the Scottish Parliament, 70% of our taxation base is controlled from London. That's the difference between independence within Europe and the arrangement we have within the United Kingdom. It's quite simple, really. Countries can be independent within the European Union.
But I wonder if you're out of step with many SNP supporters. The party's former deputy leader, Jim Sillars, he said there's plenty of evidence to show almost half of SNP voters do not want the UK or Scotland to remain in the European Union. Is he wrong?
Yes, he is. I mean, the last poll, two-thirds of SNP supporters were supporting the position I take, and interestingly enough, that was identical to the majority among Scots, that two-thirds of Scots want to remain within the European Union, and I think a healthy number of these people would like to see Scotland independent within that European structure.
Brian Monteith, that's the challenge you have, isn't it? Persuading people in Scotland to come to your side. It's a much closer race south of the border than it is here.
Well, it's a challenge we welcome. I think it's fair to say that over the last 10 or more years, the oxygen of publicity has been taken by the issue of Scotland's place in the UK and not Scotland's place in the EU. And as people in all parties, but of course the SNP, begin to discuss more the issues at hand, and for instance the possibility that if we were to leave the EU, because of the Scotland Act, the powers on fishing and farming would automatically come to Holyrood, then there are attractions that mean they can support leaving the EU and then still support Scotland eventually leaving the UK. For the nationalists, it could be a win-win.
Well, let me just put to you a point that Alex Salmond made in his speech today. He said that the EU underpins hundreds of thousands of jobs in Scotland and that the EU is a huge single market. That being the case, how many of those jobs that are tied to Europe would be lost if we left the EU?
Actually, I'll be quite honest, I've no idea. Just as the Germans and the French and the Italians have no idea how many jobs they would lose if they started a trade war as some repercussion of Scotland and the UK leaving the EU. There just won't be one because, of course, what we know is they sell more goods and services to us than we sell to them. So, in fact, it's in their interest that not just hundreds, but tens of hundreds of thousands of jobs would be lost in the European continent. And it does seem rather rich, coming from Alex, to make that kind of argument when he was less concerned about the hundreds of thousands of jobs that might be lost from losing market share from the United Kingdom. It doesn't seem a strong suit for the nationalists to play.
Alex Salmond?
Well, of course, what's really rich is Brian Monteith, who was part of the scaremongering Better Together campaign.
That's not true.
Complaining about the scaremongering from his party colleagues like David Cameron. I've never argued that you couldn't have an arrangement to guarantee the trading position between the UK and the rest of Europe. But to do that, of course, you'd have to accept a Switzerland or a Norwegian-type deal with the European Economic Area or EFTA. And if you do that, of course, you're stuck with the encumbrances that they accept to get access to the single market. And the essential divide in the Brexit campaign is between people like Brian, who see the UK as some sort of Singapore in the mid-Atlantic, trading with the world unencumbered, and those who say, oh, no, we can do the same deal as we've got at the present moment, but we'd be out with. But if you do that deal, which is possible, then you have to accept, like Norway and Switzerland do, all of the encumbrances of the European Union if you want to get the advantages of access to the single market. Now, that's the essential conundrum that nobody in the Brexit campaign has come close to solving, which is one reason why I suspect they're going to lose this referendum.
Brian Monteith, if you want free trade, you want to help make the rules that you're working within. How can we do that outside the EU if we're looking to trade with the EU in the future?
Well, I first of all have to correct Alex in the suggestion that somehow I'm a scaremonger promoting Project Fear during the previous independence referendum. I was one of the loudest critics from the unionist side, actually saying it was a mistake and that what they needed was a popular and a positive campaign. And the same goes for this referendum. And in fact, what I've been advocating in this EU referendum is that we can have a solution to trade that is not some Singapore solution, but takes us back to the position when Glasgow was the workshop of the world. You don't have to be part of China to trade with China. You don't have to be part of the USA to trade with the USA. And you do not have to be part of the EU to trade with the EU countries. What is self-evident is that some of the richest countries in the world, like Switzerland and Norway, have different separate arrangements. We could have our own arrangement, and we have a very strong hand to play because of our trading strength as the fifth largest economy in the world.
Has he got a point,
Alex? What we can go
Alexander?
back to is look at World Trade Organization rules, and we can trade with those rules or even get better trade deals if the EU wants them. But there's no fear in it.
Alex Salmond, can the UK be an independent country, just as Scotland, you would like Scotland to be?
But Brian's just given the game away. If you want to be Switzerland and Norway and have access to the single market, then you have to accept the obligations of the single market.
No, you don't.
As both Switzerland and Norway do. Norway, for example, accepts free movement of labour, which, of course, most of the Brexiteers, I don't know what Brian's position is, that's the anathema to them. So if you want to be Switzerland or Norway, you have to do what they do. I mean, Norway, for example, pays money into the EU budget in the same way as the UK does. But can I just correct this point that Brian makes about Scotland getting powers returned to it? If Brexit campaigners were to prevail, then the Prime Ministership and the Tory party would be delivered into the hands of the likes of Boris Johnson. And Boris Johnson, of course, is somebody who not only doesn't want additional powers to the Scottish Parliament, but wants to reverse the powers that we already have, rather like Brian Monteith did when he campaigned against having a Scottish Parliament in the 1990s. And that's the trouble with the Brexit campaign. People who say that they're keen on Scotland getting extra powers, but in the past, like Brian and like Boris Johnson, they've done everything possible to stop Scotland getting the powers we need to be an independent country within that European
And just on
framework.
that
Well,
point,
of course, Alex, you like to play the man and not the ball. And the truth is, as you know, that if you read any of my writing, you will know that I campaigned against the Scottish Parliament because of its inconsistencies. And then when it was brought about, I actually argued for more powers to make it work. So if you're going to bring in history, you need to read the history. You need to read what people say, and you will know that I have been an advocate of more powers in the Scottish Parliament. So don't play the man. Tackle the issues.
Well, gentlemen,
in the immortal words, if you stop telling misleading facts about Europe, then I'll stop telling the truth about you.
We must leave it there. Alex Salmond, Brian Monteith, thank you both very much.
Pleasure.
You didn't, frankly, have the balls to put country before party.